This week's once-in-a-lifetime event is obviously after weeks of Joe Biden sending us emails telling us, make no mistake, I am running. He let us know on Sunday that he was, in fact, not running. Halfway through the election, which is, precedented in the 2024 sense of it being completely unprecedented. We haven't had a nominee picked by contested convention since 1952, and we haven't had a nominee selected by delegates at the convention at all since 1968. But delegates will likely be selecting the nominee for the first time since 1968 this year. We're kicking it old school, and yet somehow still less old school than we were kicking it with Biden. Now, I got mixed feelings about this. First is that I'm just annoyed with Biden and the DNC from all the way back in 2020. I know they suck at a lot of things, but I know that they can do basic math, and they knew how fucking old Biden was going to be when he ran for re-election. And we all knew that Trump was too much of an arrogant, narcissistic, and greedy fuck to not run again, so we knew that he would be running against Trump again. And despite having all of that information, they're like, we're gonna give it a shot anyway, and the rest of us would have been like, it would have been a lot cooler if you didn't. Now, the rule of thumb is you don't not run as an incumbent because incumbents have an advantage, and so obviously that's what he was doing, and I was like, that's probably the best choice. But he also could have made the decision coming into the election being like, I'm old enough to remember the Jurassic period, and I'm wildly unpopular. Perhaps this is the time I should step aside, and we could have a primary where the people get to decide who's going to be the nominee. And he didn't do that. And then, he blue screened at the debate, and there was no coming back from that. At that point, I was like, yeah, maybe he shouldn't be the candidate. We were all thinking it fairly loudly. Then we ran into the problem of how would we logistically do this, because this is not a position we've really ever been in. So I was still sort of on the fence of perhaps riding this one out is going to be the best option. Obviously, that was not the option they went with. He stepped down. Now we're figuring shit out. And for those of you getting all excited thinking we were going to get to pick a fun new candidate, calm down. We're not going to. It's going to be Kamala. I know that's disappointing to everyone, but there's just no other logistical possibility. First off, ballot access is the biggest thing. Kamala, because she was already running for vice president, is on the ticket in all 50 states, or will be. But a lot of states have deadlines that have already passed, and the Republicans would fight us tooth and nail even if you did try to get exceptions for those rules to get a new candidate on those tickets. It's just not going to happen, and even if it did, it would make the election so incredibly messy, it would end up in the courts, and that's probably not the place you want your elections being decided in light of recent court decisions. So that would be a possibly insurmountable obstacle for anyone other than Harris. The other slightly less but not insignificant logistical consideration we need to take into account is the fact that the Biden-Harris campaign has racked up almost $100 million in campaign funds. A war chest that only Kamala Harris has the keys to. Any other candidate would be kicking off their fundraising super late in the game and be going into November with a devastating dollar deficit. And with Biden's endorsement, it's very likely his delegates are just going to default to her at this point, and that would clinch it for her either way. Now, I'm not a big Kamala fan. I thought she was a bad VP pick when we were talking about Biden potentially stepping down. I was like, why would we choose Kamala? She polls just as bad as Biden. Why replace Biden with somebody who's in the same boat? So I'd been tipped off with some inside information that this was probably coming, a few days beforehand. I knew it was probably coming Sunday. I'd already come to terms with the fact that it was gonna be Kamala if it did come, because there was no other logistical alternative. When he finally announced it, my first guttural reaction was, this was bad. This was a bad move. This is not gonna go well. I was not happy about it. But this is why I never respond to breaking news, because a couple days to calm down and meter your emotions, and your opinions and your perspectives start to change. And don't get me wrong, I still think Kamala is a weak candidate, but the more I think about it, the more I realize this was a baller Biden move. Because she's a weak candidate, but compared to who? Other people that we would have had to choose from in the Democratic Party, right? But none of those people are options this late in the game, so the only person we need to worry about if she's a weaker candidate then is Biden. As far as the polls suggest, she's the same. But from a strategy and potential gains perspective, she is way stronger. See, Biden is already old. He looks old and he acts fucking old, and he's not going to get any more unold before the election. He already old man blue screened on national television during a debate, and that wasn't going to be undid. The best we could have hoped for was Biden to continue to make strong public appearances for the next 6 months, but that's far from a guarantee. Kamala, on the other hand, isn't old enough to remember the day the Lord rested, and that's already a leg up because the bar is that fucking low. And that's good, because Trump is now the really fucking old dude in the election, and his mind is clearly going. He's clearly not remembering stuff. He can't form coherent sentences. Hell, he can't even form coherent words half the time. And as much as it pains me to remind you all, Kamala was a prosecutor. She's good at putting criminals in their place, which is convenient since, that's what she's doing by running for president. Since Trump is fucking fucking ancient and clearly suffering from dementia and unable to form coherent words, she is going to look like a fucking rock star in comparison to him. She's also thankfully kind of been out of sight, out of mind, so she doesn't have a public image really built up around her that she needs to dismantle or manage. So that means she's got a lot of potential to create her own image in the weeks coming. She has not been great about that in the past. She comes across as very arrogant and occasionally pretentious, prosecutor vibes. So now she'll have all the marketing and branding resources of the DNC behind her, and that should help in theory, not that they've been all that great in the past. But here's where I think the most baller move was for the way that all of this was handled. First, Biden announces it's Sunday at the end of the Republican National Convention. All of the press coverage Republicans were banking on for their big week at the convention, now back burner news. Trump's little counterfeit Claire's ear piercing is now yesterday's headline. All eyes are now on the Democrats and their lead up to the National Convention and what they are going to do. Now, Republicans have been caught with their dick in their hand, which is appropriate for Trump since the Epstein files are coming out now. They've spent this entire campaign building this image of Sleepy Joe. They now wasted their entire Republican National Convention campaigning hard against a guy they won't even be running against. Now they have to build their whole campaign from scratch again. And because they have absolutely zero policy that they run on, that's a problem because they've got nothing to market themselves. They can only attack their opponents and try to make them look bad. But their Sleepy Joe shit ain't gonna work anymore. Hunter Biden's laptop ain't gonna work anymore. I'm just waiting for them to just start Tourette'ing about Benghazi and Hillary's emails again. Now they've got a minefield to navigate because they've been pandering to the most openly racist, sexist people they could find since like the 70s. Now they've got King Klan at the top of their ticket running against a black Asian woman. Hell, conservatives can't keep their racist remarks in their pants about J.D. Vance being married to an Indian, and that's in their own party. They likely will not be able to contain themselves, and that's going to turn a lot of independent and moderate conservatives off. Meanwhile, Democrats have been campaigning against the same asshole since 2015, and they've got a bunch of solid policy platforms to stand on. They don't have to reinvent the wheel about their opponent, and now we've got a person who can articulate those policy wins and platforms. I fucking hope, because they've done a horrible job so far, but now we've got somebody who, can speak in coherent sentences. And now we've got the opportunity to drum up excitement about a VP pick, which will bring new blood and interest back into the campaign. Speaking of vice president, I haven't seen him on any of the short lists for VP, and I don't know why, but hear me the fuck out, why is nobody talking about Roy Cooper? He's the incredibly popular current Democratic governor of North Carolina. And he can't run for re-election because of term limits. It just makes so much sense to me. Gavin Newsom's name keeps getting dropped, but that's a horrible idea because a California Democrat is not going to resonate very well with Rust Belt states in the South. And they keep bringing up Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Illinois' governors. Michigan might not be great because 2 women on the ballot, probably not a gamble we want to take at the moment. Illinois gives conservatives a lot of fodder. And Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, I do think would be a solid choice. And Andy Beshear's name keeps getting thrown around, and he's the governor of Kentucky, which I think would be an excellent choice, except he's the governor of Kentucky. People underestimate how important governors are, especially popular blue governors in red states. Taking him out of that position for fucking vice president, I think is a horrible idea. Especially when we have Roy Cooper, who will not have the ability to run for re-election from North Carolina. He could arguably make the state of North Carolina competitive. He's also probably going to resonate pretty well with other southern states that could be competitive like Georgia and Virginia. On top of that, he's one of those warm, comfortable Mayo-American men in his mid-60s that we're all used to seeing at the top of the ticket. So I think he'd be a good option, but that's my rant about that. They'll probably pick the worst person ever because that's what they always do. And that's my take. She would have never been a candidate I would have chose, but I am feeling cautiously optimistic about her. That's the thing, I will vote for a sock puppet over Donald Trump because I'm not quite ready for authoritarian rule just yet, so it doesn't really matter to me who they put up there. I know some people, for some reason, are still on the fence. Those people did make no sense to me, but it's because those people exist that I'm equally as nervous about her as I was about Biden. But I do think that there's a lot more potential for improvement than there was under Biden, and that is why I think that this was ultimately the best choice that could have been made at this point in the race. Keep your seatbelts fastened because it is still gonna be bumpy.